Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. We are back at the roastery. We're going to be doing two roasts today. One of them is our Nicaragua. It's ideal for pour overs and espresso. Going to kind of talk through starting temp, the heat levels we go through, and then ending temp and when we pull it. The second one is our competition selection from Colombia. It's a Pink Bourbon. And we're going to kind of show you the differences in the roasting profiles that we have for them. I thought it would be kind of interesting to note two things about our roaster. So I mentioned this a lot. We have a non-standard fluid bed or air roaster by Coffee Crafters. And a lot of my viewers watch my videos, the roasting videos specifically because they have a roaster like this or they have a fluid bed roaster and they're kind of looking for tips. And so I've had this roaster for about a year now. And I just wanted to note a couple of things that differentiate it from a traditional drum roaster. And kind of the first thing that I thought of, and as I was talking with somebody this last week about roasting specifically on this roaster, is we talked about charge temps. So it's very common with drum roasters to heat up your roaster. It has a big drum inside of it, and it's basically a chamber that needs to heat up, a very large chamber. And charge temps are very important because as you're decreasing or increasing the temperature of the drum or the heat going into the drum, it doesn't fluctuate as quickly as an air roaster does. So with an air roaster or a fluid bed roaster, by the way, use them interchangeably. The main difference here is that you don't necessarily need to have a charge temp. You should get the roast air temperature to a specific level that you're looking for, but it's not important necessarily to keep it at that temperature every single time you do a roast, because you can change the temperature on the roast air temp and the loft. You can open up the air loft pretty quickly. It doesn't take a lot of time like a traditional drum roaster would. If you potentially give your drum roaster more air, it will take a little bit longer to actually cool down or heat up depending on what you're doing with it. So I wanted to note that it's not as important to get a charge temp going. And the second thing I wanted to note is you can very quickly decrease the temperature inside of the chamber, and you can also very quickly increase the temperature. So what that means is you can go from a longer roasting profile to a shorter roasting profile very quickly. And also what that means is if you're really into following rate of rise, your rate of rise could fluctuate pretty drastically if you are decreasing your temperature very quickly or vice versa, increasing it. So just two kind of notes to keep in mind, whether you're thinking about getting a fluid bed roaster or you have one already and you're looking to improve your roasting profiles. Those are just some things that I noted probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 months into roasting on this roaster. Now that I'm a year and some change over having this, wouldn't say I'm an expert yet, still learning some tips and tricks on it, but I think I have some roasting profiles down pat for specific beans that are really, really nice. I guess just one last thing with tipping, it's a common thing with these roasters is you can easily tip your coffee. And what that means is you're basically shooting too much heat onto the beans too quickly. And as I just mentioned, the temperature can actually increase or decrease very quickly. So if you increase your temperature too quickly or too drastically, the beans will actually snap on one of the ends, and that's tipping. And that will actually let out too much of the gases, and you will actually get a more flat tasting coffee. So we try not to have too much tipping in our coffee beans. And one way to ensure that doesn't happen is gradually increasing your temperature. So that's why I typically like to do slow roasting. I call it slow roasting profiles for a majority of our coffees, is that we go from a lower temperature to a higher temperature very gradually. So we're not shocking the beans with a 350 air temp to suddenly getting to 485, right? And when I say it changes pretty drastically or pretty quickly, it still is going to take about 1 to 2 minutes if you go from 350 to maybe 480, just as an example. It'll still take some time. But if you do that in a drum roaster, it's going to take a lot longer. That's why you have charge temps that are, around 430, 450 or whatever you want to set your charge temp to. So just a couple of things to note if you're looking into getting one of these roasters. And they actually just discontinued them at Coffee Crafters. They kind of created a whole new model for them. They're a little bit more rectangular. They're not open anymore here. I'm interested in trying them out if we ever need to replace this one, or maybe add a second roaster, but they still have used ones. You can find them. They're relatively cheap. So anyways, with that being said, we're gonna get our Nicaragua in. We'll talk through some of our roasting profile here, and then we'll compare it to our Pink Bourbon, which is part of our competition series. So let's go. So we just talked about not necessarily needing to kind of preheat our roaster. Although it's not necessarily important to always have it at a specific roast to air temp, or to have your thermometer lobe at a specific temp. When you have your first roast, you do want to generally keep it around a specific temperature, but it's on the second, third, fourth, and fifth roast, how many ever you're doing. That's really where it doesn't matter as much, because you already have your chamber heated up, and you don't necessarily need to heat up everything again. So right now we have it at 360 or so, and that's usually where we start. We start between 340 to 370. And the outside temperature, depending on where you are, will also affect the roast air temperature and your digital thermometer lobe. So we're pretty much where we want to be, especially for this roast. We're gonna start, as soon as we dump it in, we're going to actually turn up the heat to 5.5. This one starts at the hottest temperature that we have any of our roasts. 5.5 is usually around 415 or so. But we turn it to that right as we throw the beans in. Because, like I said, we don't want to necessarily shock the beans with a high temperature in the beginning. We want to start it with a lower temperature and then gradually get it to that higher temperature. So we'll get the Nicaragua in, and then I'll talk you through it. We're gonna leave the heat knob at 5.5 until 1 minute. Then we're gonna jump it up to 6.5. And then we're actually gonna leave it in 6.5 for a few minutes, and kind of let the temperature get to the Maillard phase, and keep it in that yellowing phase for as long as we can. We're really big into dragging out the yellowing phase as much as possible. That's really where I feel like the development of the internal bean is really happening. So we want to drag that one out as much as possible. And yellowing is in full effect now. You might be able to see some of the yellow color on it, but we're going to leave it in this temperature for as long as we can. And during this phase, we're keeping the roast air temp around 450 or so. And we're gonna leave it in this temperature, like I said, for as long as we can. And that is because I believe that a lot of the development is happening during this phase. And this is where a lot of those really sweeter notes will start to come out and be extracted from the coffee. So it's going to be a more on the rate of rise scale. It's going to be, or chart. It's going to be a little more flat during this phase, but that's what we're looking for. That's ideally what we want. And as of right now, we are a couple of degrees behind our average roast. So we're increasing it to 7.5, which is the hottest that we'll get the heat knob to. And this will get it to around 490 or so. And that's really where we want to keep the temperature for the rest of the roast. So this is the gradual heat increase. This limits a lot of the tipping that happens on the coffee beans. When we actually did our final heat increase, we went up about 1/4 of a knob higher. The internal bean temperature is a little bit behind of where we want it to be right now, so we went a little bit hotter. And what we'll do is, as the roast air temp gets to where ideally we want it to end, we're going to slowly start to bring down that heat again. And that should be around the time of first crack anyway, so it'll be perfect. So if you ever see that, maybe you do 5 roasts and they're all very consistent, and then one of them is a little bit behind or maybe even ahead, you can toggle, especially with these roasters, which is why it makes it so great. You can toggle them and it will change the temperature pretty quickly. Yeah, and we've basically caught up to the temperature that we had at our last 3 roasts, so this is all good now. We're going to keep it at this heat knob temperature at about 7.9 or so. We're gonna keep it here for another minute or so, and then gradually start to decrease it, because that's when first crack will start to begin. And the development phase is about to start beginning now. We're starting to crank down the heat a little bit, and it's beginning now. So this roast is actually going to be our longest roast, and also the, I don't like to categorize coffees like this, but our darkest roast. We go completely to the end of first crack, and then we pull it. So it's about 2 minutes into the first crack. So from the beginning of first crack all the way till the end of it. That's ideally what we're looking for here. All right, and we are going to pull it. Exactly the time we were looking for, plus or minus about 10 seconds. Roast air temperature was pretty hot in the end, but that was fine. And the internal bean temperature got exactly to where we wanted it. So very consistent roast, and exactly what we're looking for. Good roast. Now we'll compare this one and this roasting profile to our Pink Bourbon, which is part of our competition series from Colombia. The roasting profile is going to be a bit different on that one. All right, and our next roast is the Colombia Pink Bourbon. This is only 2 pounds of coffee, so we're going to roast 2 pounds of it. It smells amazing. The fermentation on this is I can't even explain it. It just, I would want to drink it like this if this actually tasted good. But the smell of it is like nothing you would ever smell. They do some amazing fermentation here. Okay, so back to the roasting. It's 2 pounds. So we started at a lower heat temperature, but relative to a 3 pound roast, it's actually on the higher side. So we started at 4.5 on the knob here. That gets it to roughly 400 degrees, but it's about 385 or so, between 385 and 400. And we want it to be there for the first minute, and then we crank it up to 5.5, and then we continue to move on with that roast. But it's going to be a slower roast, just like all of our other ones. And once again, we want to extend out the yellowing or Maillard phase, yellowing through Maillard. We want to extend that out as much as possible, because that's really where we feel the development is happening. But in terms of heat level, where we start, we really want it to start on the higher side, versus all of our other 2 pound roasts start on heat knob 4, which is going to keep it around 350, to 330 to 350. This one we want to start around 385 or so. So we're going to get it in. We're at 375 now. As soon as we throw it in, it drops, and then it'll hop right back up to the proper temperature. Internal lobe is at 127. That's perfect. And we're going to get it in. Oh, we just moved it up to 5.5 on the knob. We're going to get it relatively slower to internal bean temperature of 300. And we want to extend out that yellowing phase for as long as we can. So we're going to watch this. One other thing I wanted to note that I've been doing recently is I've been keeping the lock a little bit higher, and it's been creating a more even roast. If it's too low when you're roasting and the air that's pushing through it is too low, it's too close to the other beans, there's not enough distribution across all the beans. So if it's higher, then you can push out more of those beans and distribute it throughout the loft a little bit more consistently. And yellowing is beginning now, so we're going to crank up the heat to 6. And loft distribution looks pretty good. A little high, so we're going to crank that down a little bit. And yellowing is still going on. It looks really good. Color looks very even, which is awesome. That's what we're looking for. Man, the smell in this is just amazing. Wow. This phase is really where you get a lot of that interesting kind of smell. But since it's so fermented, it's different. It's not as grassy. So since we are in yellowing phase and we're getting to the tail end of it, we have been extending it out. So we've been trying to keep our roast air temp around a consistent temperature for as long as we can, trying to extend it. At 6 minutes, we're actually going to jump up heat temperature a little bit more and then start to get it to our drying phase as quickly as possible. This coffee is a lot more difficult to roast than a lot of our other roasts. It requires a lot of my time watching over it. all coffees should be watched over as they're being roasted, but specifically this one, it's a little bit more difficult to keep the consistency of the roast. So I'm constantly watching over, constantly tinkering with the loft size and the heat levels. And we're gonna get it to our highest heat level temperature in maybe 15 seconds. And we're about a minute away from first crack beginning. This is really where browning is happening, where a lot of that development is happening, very crucial time in the roast, where we really need to watch over the heat temperature. So roaster temps at 500, we're gonna actually decrease the heat a little bit here. Don't want it to get too hot. And we're probably less than a minute away from first crack beginning. And we are exactly at the same pace as our other roast, which is great. And first crack is beginning. And this one's gonna stay in first crack for about 30 seconds. So we're about 20 seconds in. I'm gonna go to about 405, right there. And we're going to pull it now. All right, great roast. Wow, everything looks amazing in this one. All right, and that's gonna end it with the video. Hope you enjoyed the content. I really like these comparison videos because it really shows how different the coffees can be on the roasting scale, and why it's important to build out different profiles depending on which coffee that you're roasting. So just because a coffee is from one country or one area doesn't mean it's going to roast the same as another coffee from one area, and maybe even the same variety. Processing methods at the farm are really important, and they dictate your roasting profile. So I like doing these comparisons. Even the coffees showcasing a more traditional coffee like the Java that we just roasted from Nicaragua, and comparing that one to this competition Pink Bourbon from a very famous farm, and just really kind of showing the differences and the subtleties of the coffees when they're roasting. It's really cool for me, but I think it's just important to note during your roasting process that not one coffee is going to roast exactly the same. So just keep that in mind. Hopefully it's helpful. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and leave a comment below if you have any questions. Consider subscribing if you like this content, and let me know what other content you like. I have a lot of people reaching out on Instagram saying more roasting videos, more roasting videos. So that's why I'm creating this video, also because it's just very interesting to me. So if you have any other suggestions on videos, I really don't mind telling you all about my process for brewing and for roasting. Love to make content, so leave a comment, subscribe, like, and I'll see you at the next video. Peace.